those folks who did vote for Donald Trump and who may be believing what he says about a fraudulent election, an election that has been stolen. It's one thing for you, you're a Democrat, you say we're not going to pay attention to that, but there are millions of Americans who will. How should Joe Biden speak to them and address that?
Well, my sense, Savannah, is you're going to have everybody from Senate Republicans to Republican governors to even folks on Fox News saying the election's over. Just to go back to the map Chuck Todd was at, this is not a close election historically. Okay, Joe Biden's going to win with a higher percentage of the popular vote than Barack Obama did in 2012, and certainly Donald Trump did in 2016, than George W. Bush did in either of his elections. And his electoral vote's going to be north of 300 in all likelihood. So it's a significant win. And again, I think things start changing today. That intensifies tomorrow. So Donald Trump may not be satisfied, but I think Joe Biden is going to reach out to those voters. I'm sure it's one of the first things he's going to say tonight is I'm going to be a president for all of you. And speak to the fact that I know a lot of people voted against me. I know people have concerns about the election because of what Donald Trump's saying, but this is a free and fair election, and I'm going to go out there and fight with everything I have for you, which is he's going to have the toughest challenge any incoming president has had since FDR. So he needs to rally the American people, as many as he can, around some of his policy prescriptions and how he's going to lead us out of this pandemic.
And I think, too, Savannah, I mean, everything we've seen from the former vice president, now president-elect, underscores that he's likely to do what David was just outlining. This is someone who has had a sort of North Star on his campaign all the way along. I mean, he had so many people doubting him in the primary, in the general election, even his own, sometimes campaign staffers behind the scenes, wondering if he was making the right set of decisions. But he stayed true to that, even in the face of that kind of opposition. He kept saying, what's happening on Twitter does not represent what's happening everywhere. The American people want something broader than what's happening. And he ultimately was vindicated in that. And everything that we know about Joe Biden says that he is going to be someone, he has a deep, long-standing, decades-long, really, relationship with Mitch McConnell, who, may be the Republican leader, again, may not be, depending on those two runoffs. But he is someone who, when Obama was president, when we had President Obama, it was Vice President Joe Biden who was cutting deals with members of Congress and working with those relationships. So I think we are about to enter a very different era. And the cabinet question is still an open one, I think, partly because control of the Senate is not determined yet. So the kinds of cabinet nominees that Joe Biden could get through a Democratic Senate might be different than the ones he could get through a Republican Senate. But I'm not sure that Joe Biden really would want. I feel like he knows who he wants in his cabinet, and it may actually line up with a Republican Senate. Is this the signature challenge, Andrea, for Joe Biden going forward? I mean, yes, he knows he's going to face Republican opposition. There's nothing new about that. The parties are always at loggerheads. But within his own party, he has, as Casey just outlined, a long history of rather centrist streaks. Sure. That is not where the activism in the Democratic Party is right now. How will he navigate that terrain?
Well, there are two pieces to that, I believe. The first is the transition between a hostile White House and Joe Biden. And there's some predicates for this, because when President Obama came in from George W. Bush, they were overwhelmed with how welcoming the Bush White House was to them, despite their policy disagreements over Iraq and a host of other issues. They found a roadmap. It was an absolutely professional transition. Turn the page to the transition to Donald Trump. The Obama White House went about it the way they had been welcomed. They planned all sorts of tabletop exercises. I was at the White House one day doing an interview with Susan Rice. She was about to go into a tabletop with the incoming Mike Flynn National Security team.
On a pandemic.
On a pandemic.
Yeah.
And there was nothing planned by the incoming team. They had nobody to meet with because there had been no appointments. Remember, Chris Christie and the transition had been fired. They had replaced Chris Christie with Mike Pence on the incoming transition. They were never organized on policy. It was never about policy. It was always about Donald Trump. And that has been the case. So you're going to find not only the hostility, but there are so many vacancies and the White House chief of staff and all of that. So they're going to have problems in just the transition. But well, there are rules. They're very well laid out, but they were never observed by the Trump team coming in.
But do you have to wait till the elections are certified?
Well, they do have transition offices that are set up even when they become nominees. but now it goes into full gear. So they're ready. The Biden team's ready. But you're absolutely right, Savannah. They're going to have to navigate AOC, Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders may want the labor cabinet position. They're going to push back because they're going to say that there's a Republican.
When you're talking about mandates, though, Chuck, do you think there's a mandate for that?
No, the mandate is for, again,
I would think the result of this election say no.
No, exactly. One of my favorite semi-battleground states, New Hampshire, and I say semi because it was one that I think the president, again, so many strategic mistakes we're going to look back and say that he made. New Hampshire and their inability to get that back into play was one of them. But New Hampshire decidedly, voted for Joe Biden, re-elected their Democratic U.S. Senator by double digits, and below the ballot decided to hand power on a local and state level to Republicans. The point is that they're clearly, and I go back to the 4 years ago, none of the above vote, they didn't like Trump or Clinton and decided to vote for a third party candidate. That group of voters decidedly went ahead and chose Joe Biden, but they did not choose a Democratic Senate. They did not choose, in many cases, Democratic House members. And so that's going to be definitely that challenge. But I want to go back to something David Plouffe said, which is, I do think another way to sort of suck the oxygen out of whatever the president might try to do in the agita around the election is you roll these nominees out fast.
Exactly.
I think before Thanksgiving, you're going to have a government in waiting. Before Thanksgiving, this is before the elections are certified technically, but what it does is it absolutely sucks the oxygen. It makes it like, what are you talking about?
Creates a sense of inevitability.
And by the way, we're going to call other states. And as more votes come in, so it's not even going to be a one-state election.
There'll come a time when world leaders start calling the president.
Justin Trudeau, right.
And remember that Donald Trump went to Saudi Arabia. He did not have to go to Canada or Mexico, which is the tradition, to go to your neighbors.
As your first visit.
The weirdest first visit ever. Just to make Saudi Arabia your first stop.
And Joe Biden remembers 1992 in Little Rock. I was there. And they didn't get the cabinet and the White House staff nominated until Christmas Eve. It was an extraordinarily drawn-out process. He already knows what he wants, and I think he's ready to roll it out.
As you well know, the Biden transition team is already in place, and those meetings are already going on. They've been going on.
Absolutely, and these are the people who have been part of his team, part of his universe, as well as presidential candidates.
But by the way, unlike Donald Trump, who couldn't reach back to a previous Republican administration to find people, which is also the struggle he had in his transition, is you had a mainstream, the establishment of the Democratic Party.
He wouldn't let the Never Trumpers, right. He vetoed them.
So in this way, putting together a government for Joe Biden, he was in the previous Democratic government himself. So these are already veterans. And look, he's going to bring in new people because I do think you need to have a new generation. And it isn't just about appearance sake to have a new generation. I think it needs to be real. I think, no more of these, these glass ceilings need to be gotten rid of on all of these cabinet posts. So there's no doubt that we're going to see a lot of that stuff shattered. But I think it is also going to be about finding that balance and being responsive to the electorate as a whole.
I do think that there is going to be a significant focus on, Chuck, I think you were suggesting that the diversity of Joe Biden's cabinet. I think that is one thing that Democrats on Capitol Hill, but also across the country, they're looking to see themselves represented.
You probably have a woman defense secretary, Michelle Flournoy.
And possibly
she worked in the first woman treasury, Obama
administration. Possibly the first woman Treasury Secretary, the first woman defense secretary. Sort of these last for some reason, relics, if you will, and just that stuff. And by the way, you shatter that stuff, and at the same time, you can still strike your ideological balance. And that's what he's going to have to do. It's not going to be easy, and he's going to have to strike this balance. But he does have in the same way Barack Obama was able to strike that balance when he came in, because he had a crisis immediately. And it was sort of like, look, you may have your issue that you really want. Come on, you've got to appoint this person, the deputy undersecretary of X. You're like, we don't have time for that right now. This time it's a pandemic. We don't have time for the little fights. And I think that also will benefit Joe Biden's ability to get the first cabinet that he wants, put it that way.
We're showing you images that are coming into our newsroom from around the country, from Lafayette Park in Washington, D.C., and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Those are some Trump supporters, and we'll continue to monitor those images. Let's go to Kristen Welker. She's at Biden headquarters getting reaction. We mentioned, Kristen, already that Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, has reached out to Joe Biden, the President-elect. What else are you hearing?
Let me read you what we're hearing from Justin Trudeau, and then let's talk about the broader context of how the world is reacting, Savannah. Justin Trudeau writes, "Congratulations, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Our two countries are close friends, partners, and allies. We share a relationship that's unique on the world stage. I'm really looking forward to working together and building on that with both of you." Look, President Trump was someone who ran on an America First foreign policy, and that is how he governed. And so some of America's traditional relationships with its foreign allies have been strained throughout the Trump administration, something that he would acknowledge and felt quite proud of. Frankly, he pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement. He pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal. These are things that Joe Biden has said he wants to rejoin. He said he wants to negotiate a better Iran nuclear deal. But just to give you a sense, and think about NATO. President Trump had a number of NATO summits which were quite tense at times. You'll recall that one moment where you had several world leaders who were talking about the president behind his back, mocking him. That was caught on camera. And that was something that, from the perspective of President Trump, he saw as a badge of honor. He would argue, look, he forced those NATO member countries to meet their commitments when it comes to foreign defense spending. But on the other hand, his critics would argue that some of America's most traditional relationships have been strained, and that has been a challenge for America's strength on the world stage. And at the same time, embracing some of America's foes, or those with whom America has had strained relationships with, like Vladimir Putin, like Kim Jong-un. Now, Biden has said, if you want to take North Korea as an example, that he would not meet with Kim Jong-un without preconditions. President Trump has met with Kim Jong-un 3 times, and still no nuclear deal, still no agreement for nuclear disarmament on the part of North Korea. So I think you are going to see a very different relationship with America on the world stage than we have seen in the past 4 years. It will be up to the historians to determine how that plays out. But Joe Biden has been very clear. He sees this very differently. He sees America's place on the world stage very differently. He does not subscribe to the America First foreign policy. I also want to make one more note, which is that Joe Biden has changed his Twitter handle. It now says President-elect, guys.
All right, Kristen, thank you. Let's go to Hallie Jackson now at the White House. Are you here?